Goeiedag, mijn naam is Evan, ik ben immigratieprocureur hier in Amerika en ik wil jou helpen om immigratiewet te verstaan. Now, last night as I was sitting going over some of the comments in the comment sections of the videos, I decided that I really wanted to make a video that discussed the difference between terms that you see being thrown around when it comes to this Afrikaner refugee program and what is going to be required of you under the standards of the program. If you look at the U.S. Embassy's website page for South Africa, what is going to be required for you to articulate concerning this past persecution or well-founded fear of future persecution. And as always, if you're new to the channel, please remember to like, subscribe, share. If you are a return viewer, consider becoming a member of this channel to support what I'm doing here. I try and post daily videos concerning the Afrikaner refugee program and or Afrikaner asylum seekers here in the United States, news that pertains to them and their asylum applications. But as I was going through some of the stuff and looking at older videos too, some of Colonel Wyatt's videos, some of my videos, what I see happening is the problem that the United States, whether it's Trump's executive order or the U.S. Embassy's website for South Africa, have used different terms at different times, and it's confusing people. And it's confusing you because a lot of the things that you experience in South Africa are both discrimination and persecution, while some is simply discrimination and not persecution. And why does that matter? It matters because under a refugee program, as you have seen, you are going to be required individually at an interview with a USCIS refugee officer to articulate past persecution or a well-founded fear of future persecution. The reason the word discrimination has been thrown around is because a lot of people think that they can be used interchangeably, but they cannot. In law, and I tell this to law students, words matter, and they're very important. And the definition of those words has to be known by the person trying to interpret the law to understand what the law actually expects of you. The problem is that Trump's original executive order in February did say that he was directing the State Department and Department of Homeland Security to look into creating a relief program for Afrikaners suffering from racial discrimination. Now, when people saw that, their brains immediately clicked on to things like BEE. And then those individuals who didn't follow up, and again, this isn't on you, right? I'm not being critical of anyone who didn't follow through with all of the add-ons that came with this program, because it's a lot and you're going through a lot, in South Africa. I get that. But remember, in the end, the onus is on you to do your research and homework here. But people took that and they ran with that, and that's why I saw a lot of comments on my channel saying, well, of course I'm being discriminated against and I deserve a refugee program. Because of BEE, I can't get a job, I can't work, I can't get internships, I can't do all of this stuff, all of these racial laws and things like that. And I would always chime back, well, unfortunately, the United States doesn't recognize economic refugees, and simply having laws that discriminate against you are not enough to make a claim for persecution. And I gave the example, and again, I do not agree with any of the race-based laws in South Africa. My viewers who have been here for a while, you know this. I don't want to have to keep on prefacing all of this, but for new viewers, I believe BE and all of that is nonsense. It is discriminatory, and it needs to end. It prevents you from having reasonable and decent lives in your country. I get all of that. But that's not what I do here on YouTube. What I do is I take the law, I take the facts, I apply the facts to the law, and I give you an analysis. Again, for educational purposes only. This is not legal advice. This is just my analysis of what's put in front of me. And I've told you that BEE alone does not amount to that level of persecution. And some of you would get mad at me because you were like, well, it's discrimination. Okay, discrimination is not the marker. U.S. immigration law draws a clear distinction between discrimination and persecution when it comes to refugee and asylum claims. And this is what needs to be understood. Persecution has not explicitly been defined by the INA, but it has been defined in subsequent court cases and by the Board of Immigration Appeals. So federal circuits have ruled on it, and the Board of Immigration Appeals has ruled on it. And what persecution is defined as is the intentional infliction of suffering or harm against those who differ, meaning you're having this harm inflicted upon you because of an immutable characteristic, something you can change, something you shouldn't have to change. In this case, it being your race. It has to be an extreme level of conduct. It has to rise to that extreme level. It is a serious threat to life or freedom, and that infliction of harm or suffering is more than mere discrimination or harassment. It uses the term discrimination to define what persecution is, that persecution rises above and beyond mere discrimination. Laws discriminate all the time. And depending on how they discriminate, they fall under a more serious level of scrutiny in the United States. So, for example, my daughter is 18. She's discriminated against because she can't drink till she's 21. She's discriminated based on age. But in the United States, we allow that, and the level of scrutiny for that law is very low because it serves a reasonable governmental purpose, keeping kids from drinking and driving and things like that. But when you start to discriminate based on other things, such as, for example, gender, do certain laws discriminate based on gender? Do government organizations discriminate based on gender? Yes, they do. I'll give you an example. If you were to go to, let's say, a police department and apply for a job, your physical fitness standards as a woman might be the same as a man. Well, that's not fair. That's discriminating. However, the government has made the argument this serves an important government interest, meaning that they want to make sure police officers are physically fit to do what they need to do. Therefore, women can be held at different standards. And for the most part, the courts have agreed to that. But when it comes to race and things like that, when we deal, and you'll see my point in a second, when we talk about issues like the BEE, we do have race-based laws in the United States. You know, you've seen a lot of them coming to an end recently, such as DEI, and affirmative action has been challenged. But the Supreme Court of the United States has said that racially discriminatory laws can be made and can be legal and constitutional if they are meant to correct previous wrongs. So things like affirmative action have been allowed because it's righting a previous wrong when people of African descent, African Americans, and other minorities weren't given the same opportunities as whites. Now, I'm not saying that's comparable to BEE. BEE and all that, I believe, is out of control and terrible, and is doing a lot to keep y'all from having quality of life and issues there. But a U.S. government official might argue, well, we allow racially discriminatory laws, therefore let's look at BEE. And even if BEE is economically discriminatory, unless, and I've told you this before, the United States does not recognize economic asylees or economic refugees unless that economic persecution rises to the level where your basic life needs cannot be met and there is a threat of death, meaning you can't work anywhere, then it's never going to be enough to rise to that level of persecution. It simply is discrimination. And not all discrimination, even if it's widespread or systematic, it doesn't automatically amount to persecution. Right? The courts and the government will look at the severity, the intentionality, and the impact of it. So I'm not saying that BEE can't be used to support your claim of persecution. But go back and watch my video of the persecution sandwich. That shouldn't be what you lead with, right? That sandwich should be packed with the persecution that amounts to threats of life and liberty and your family. You know, we were talking about serious, extreme levels of conduct. The fact that a political party in your country, a major political party, chants for the death of Boers and people of white European descent. The one bullet, one settler. All of that sort of stuff. Malema. The fact that your own Minister of Agriculture said if that group ever gets into power, then there will be a genocide, and the ruling coalition is the only thing preventing a genocide. All of that, and then BEE, I believe amounts to persecution. But you have to understand why I'm so quick to, when people just lead with BE, I usually comment and I'm like, you have to understand discrimination and harassment are not the same thing, right? I'll give you another example. The courts here have held that discrimination or employment against Christians in Iran, right, was very serious. But it didn't rise to the level of persecution because it lacked the physical threats, the physical harm, or the threats to life and liberty. So there's a relevant example of what the courts have used that's almost analogous. People being discriminated because of an immutable characteristic, their religion, they can't work, they can't get equal education opportunities, but because there were no physical threats to life and liberty, it didn't rise to the level of persecution. So that's what I want you to understand. So discrimination, which is the first term that Trump used, which is understandable because Trump is the executive branch, right? He's doing the best he can. His order was to direct his executive departments to create a program, which they would then look at the relevant law and apply it correctly, right? So discrimination is this idea of unequal treatment based, again, on race, religion, nationality. It could be morally or legally wrong, but it doesn't necessarily meet the legal standards for persecution as far as refugee programs and asylum programs. Persecution is that severe harm, that severe suffering inflicted intentionally, and it goes beyond mere discrimination and harassment. It has to be targeted and result in consequences such as threats to life, physical violence, or severe economic deprivation to the point where it affects your survival. That's how far economic discrimination would have to go to rise to the level of persecution. So again, remember, it seems clear that the burden is on you to articulate, again, a word that is kind of, wishy-washy when it comes to me as an attorney to define what it means. Explain that you've either suffered this persecution in the past, that extreme level, or you have that well-founded fear of future persecution, that extreme level of conduct, and it's on you. So I am not saying toss out BE. By all means, use BE. It is discrimination. But that discrimination has to add to that list of things that amount to persecution. It cannot simply be used alone. It doesn't amount to persecution. And I think that once my viewers, you sit there and you realize there's a difference, a legal distinction between the term discrimination and persecution, that you will understand why I'm so adamant about this, about you really sitting and practicing. That's what all attorneys tell clients to do before you go in front of an interviewer. Don't go in there cold. Practice what you're going to say. And for all the trolls out there, that's not lying. That's being prepared for an interview, which everyone should do, whether it's a job interview or, going to the government or anything. You prepare so you actually look like you know what you're talking about and you're articulate. And as you said, you can articulate these points that you say, here is what has risen to that level of extreme conduct and what I've experienced. Because clearly there is, whether it's the farm runners, the EFF, the kill the boar, the one bullet, the one farmer, all of that stuff, there is clearly persecution in South Africa. But remember that since it's on you to articulate, you really have to be prepared to know what the term persecution means so you don't go in there and argue discrimination, which in the past our government has said, that sucks, we're sorry your country sucks and they discriminate against you. But discrimination does not make a refugee program or does not make an asylum grant for people already in the United States. It has to go above mere discrimination and harassment. It has to be persecution, which is that extreme level of conduct. So I hope this video helps clear it up a little bit. I believe you all have strong, reasonable cases of that well-founded fear of future persecution. I think that goes without saying. But remember, it's your burden to articulate and to explain how this is such an extreme level. It's threats to life, it's physical harm, it's violence, it's all that stuff which U.S. courts and law have determined to be persecution, not simply discrimination. So as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, and I will see you for the next video.